look, you got to have confidence. You got to believe in your value. You got to believe in what you're selling. Sure.
Yep.
But that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. Like you need to actually have some business fundamentals that this is based on. It's not a series of models that you've drawn up and invented yourself. Anybody who's got that, come on, this is based on a canon of literature. And I think as a historian, I have maybe too much respect for the past, but I think we do ourselves a disservice by thinking that anything's really new.
Welcome to Levership Podcast. My name is Chris Johnston. I'm the CEO of Levership, and I've got Matt Symes here with me, CEO of Simplicity Designs. Today's topic is a little bit more about the how did we get here? With Levership, with Simplicity, I was a former customer. I bought into this program and this work based on the background, and I don't think the story gets told enough. We get asked about a lot, like, what is your program based on? What's the framework? And I really want to get into that today, Matt, because I think it's an amazing story that people need to hear.
I sometimes give the introduction that I'm the great-grandson of a subsistence farmer, the grandson of a first-generation entrepreneur, blue-collar roofer. I spent my 18th and 19th summers on the top of black roofs, which surprises a lot of people. And my dad was the first one to graduate with a university degree. In our family, I was the second. And he grew up the son of an entrepreneur. So he often tells the story about understanding where the butter and the bread came from, right? His father would sit at the dinner table with two phones, and one would be for the customers coming in, and one would be for him having to call out potentially while he was dealing with a customer. So you'd eat supper with two phones sitting beside, right? Just the classic entrepreneur. And my grandfather scaled a company to a certain point, and then he blew it up. He couldn't handle the stress, the pressure, the responsibility that had come with all of that, right? He had hired most of the family, had multiple trucks running. Everybody's seeing the revenue that's coming in, but nobody's really understanding what it takes to run a business. And my grandfather talked really openly with me about how difficult those years were. And those were my dad's formative years, right? 6 to 16, watching this happen. And then my dad, my grandfather ended up doing very well for himself. I mean, he blew it up. He brought it back down to a couple trucks, classic, bringing it down, profit off of it, invest in land. He retired at 49, did exceptionally well. And I often even get a little emotional talking about it because I got to start life on the 99-yard line. Right, you get a grandfather that invests in a vehicle for you so you can get to work, invest in an education degree, invested in my dad's education degree, all those things that he enabled us to do. But something always stuck with my dad, like, why did that blow up? Right? And there's so many lessons that my dad observed that my grandfather got right, and so many that he got wrong. And so my dad coming out of his chemical engineering degree, and of course my grandfather going through this is like, get a job in a big business with a pension, like so many entrepreneurs do. Yeah. Right? They just don't want their kids
being tortured by the business like they were.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're like, I've gone through the pain. You don't have to, right? Go get a safe bit. And so my dad had a number of job opportunities coming out of his chem eng degree at UNB. And for one reason or another, out of the 21 job opportunities he had, he picked Grand Prairie, Alberta, which, early 80s, Grand Prairie, Alberta is like Fort Mac before Fort Mac's Fort Mac. Like it's north of Edmonton, right? So it's north of civilization. But he picks Procter Gamble in Grand Prairie, Alberta, just at the time when they are going through another evolution. And why this is so important to the story is that out of the original Fortune 500, a list put together in 1955, only 9% of those companies still remain. Less than 45 companies out of 500 still remain in the Fortune 500. So Procter & Gamble has proven time and time again that it can evolve. It can reinvent itself, because that's what these great companies do. They're largely solving the same problem they've always solved, but with new ways of solving it. And Dad got a firsthand seat at how they were reinventing themselves again. And they were doing it through the use of modern management systems, bringing in continuous improvement, bringing in Deming's work that had gone through the war and was really at the basis of Japan rebuilding. And that's a whole story we could get into. But you think about Japan after the Second World War, we remember the nuclear bombs, but we don't remember the firebombing of Tokyo. I mean, Japan was basically a flattened, rock-filled island. And if you've ever been to Japan, 90% of it's uninhabitable. So how does that small country become the number 2 economy in the world within 15 years after the Second World War? And a lot of it comes down to Deming, Dr. Deming. And Dr. Deming's principles were then being adopted at P&G in a meaningful way. So you're talking about Deming drives the war effort, Deming drives Japan, then that whole system comes back to Procter Gamble. And they're implementing this system. And this system is all about how do you manage the abstract? How do you get performance out of a plant? How do you drive continuous improvement? So he goes there as a young, newly minted engineer. There's lots of great stories if we had more time, but at the end of the day, he learns what it is to think outside in from the customer's perspective, right? P&G is built on that. And I want to reiterate this because, like P&G, its original founding partners, they're brother-in-laws, and they're going door to door selling candles. Now, when I ask people what problem candles solve, what do you think they always give me as an answer? Light is the first one. And then when I tell them that's not it, what do you think the second one is that they say? Heat. You get light and heat. Turns out the candle didn't solve either of those problems. You're talking the late 1880s. You're talking no running water. You're talking humans who are using their bodies often and not able to bathe. The primary use of a candle was so that your house didn't stink. And they realized that there was a new way to solve that problem with the onset of more, urban centers, more running water. People could take a bath. Soap would probably be something. And then you get their whole business built on soap, right? So that ethos of outside in, finding the problem and solving it in a new way is just baked into their ethos. And often what you find is graduates out of Procter Gamble, and this is a shout out to Procter Gamble, they are so good at training their people that most of the people who leave Procter Gamble have extremely successful careers versus people who leave other great organizations, but they can only work within that organization, right? They work within that system. They get caught in that system. But Procter & Gamble understood how to evolve and how to train their people in systems thinking, etc. And that brings us now. So my dad, of course, he's a maritimer and he's headed out west. And the classic story is you come home, right? So my dad eventually ends up at JDI, ends up at Irving. And you look him up on LinkedIn, you'll see he ended his career as VP of Organizational Change at JDI, largely responsible for helping to implement modern management systems and modern HR systems at JDI. And they're an extremely private company. So, the only thing that I'll share about that time is what little I know is my dad helped first bring what he did at Procter & Gamble to 1 mill and then 7 mills and eventually all 62 of the companies at the time. And we started Simplicity based on that. And why that's important is that my dad, when it came to strategy, had introduced the Balanced Scorecard Collaborative to JDI. He was a beta test center for Kaplan and Norton's new way of doing strategy. They had brought 40X and all the best out of Covey into daily management and the people bit. They had invested in what GE and Caterpillar was doing from process improvement and building systems, et cetera. So the very best on Lean Six Sigma, et cetera. So
amazing collection of thinking, right?
And most people think about parts of this. Yep. How to do better strategy, maybe how to invest in your people and do better development. Maybe they think about how to get the most out of a minute. Maybe they're a Lean Six Sigma zealot and they want to be the stats department that finds your best improvement. But putting it together in a system is what Dad was responsible for. And as I was getting near the end of my PhD, he said, I'm ready to have a different impact. And so he said, if I retire early, will you come home, join your brother and I, and let's start this. And so this company and what it's based on, it's not based on a set of frameworks that work for an entrepreneur somewhere. It's not based on 2 or 3 books on coaching. It is based on the canon of the total quality management movement and what the best organizations that consistently reinvent themselves know that the others don't. And so this whole system at Levership that we put out there, this whole way of doing strategy, this whole way of doing improvement is based on such a rich and deep proven methodology. Other people, they've spent their careers getting better at doing physio. They've spent their careers getting better at being a painter. They've spent their careers at their trade. Our trade just happens to be strategy, execution of that strategy. It's an odd trade to be in.
So you jumped all the way ahead to Levership, but spend a little bit of time talking about what was the time at Simplicity like? Like, what were the customers like? I mean, I was one of those customers, I guess, before Levership existed, but what in that part of the journey gets us to Levership?
Yeah, I think one of the things when Dad left JDI early, when he retired early, one of the things was, how do we repackage this so that it can benefit small business? And, you have to have a certain size in order to get intentional about your investment in strategy and your investment in improvement work. It's, for too many people, strategy is an event. It happens once every 3 years. You make a couple decisions and, you hope that the energy of the room carries the day as you go try to execute it. And then you go back to the habits and you can't. So we're so lucky to act as a forcing function. But what we found increasingly is that the small businesses that we wanted to really help with this, it was still inaccessible on a one-on-one approach. Very successful. And there were some that invested in it and were willing to look at it like a capital investment. They were willing to look at it as a 2 to 3 year payback. And look, we got a small accounting firm, prime example. They were doing $1 million. The owner was taking next to nothing out of the business. He had almost no EBITDA. And 18 months later, he's at, he went from 1 million to 1.1 million, which doesn't sound like a big lump, or a big jump. But he could also take a $100,000 salary and he had $250,000 on the bottom line. So you're talking about a $100,000 improvement on the top, $350,000 gain. This is, incredible results.
Yeah. Life-changing, really, when you think about a small business.
Exactly.
And what they could choose to do in the run of a year to create that impact.
And he did it over 18 months and he ended up with that annualized amount of return, and he was willing to invest $250,000 to do it. There's not many people who are willing to invest $250,000 on strategy and a bunch of sticky notes. And the other thing that we found is look, we know the value we bring, but you could never capture the full value and get paid for that in that game of small business consulting. So we knew that for the most part, we're going to have to do this for larger organizations who can really benefit from it and need it. And look, if you're working with a $40 million business, over the course of a 2-day strategy session, you can trip on a $600,000 quick hit. No matter how good you are, you're not going to find a $600,000 quick hit in $1 million business, right? So Simplicity was a decade and still very much alive and going and very invested in large business transformation and some medium-sized business transformation, one-on-one work.
Yep. Tons of success stories as well, right?
Yep. And look, really proud of that canon of work, and still no intentions of stopping that canon of work, right? I mean, right now it does really amazing transformational work for some larger organizations and some medium-sized businesses, and it is a shared services engine for our equity portfolio. It's awesome. I love what it can do. It is just one step too far for most business owners to invest in when they're under $5 million. And so what we wanted to put in front was something that could be really accessible to the business owner who's doing somewhere between, $500,000 a year in revenue and $5 million revenue. How do we make this approachable, accessible, and have the impact? And so we basically packed it all in. And about 5 years ago, we started piloting on how can we bring this together in a way that is a lot of value for individual companies and is profitable for us to deliver, right? We'd be doing a disservice if we didn't show other businesses that we were profitable doing this, because that's what we're helping them create. So it'd be kind of ironic if we were putting together an unsustainable business model to help business owners create a sustainable business model.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I mean, I think your heart's always been in that small business. How do we solve for that? How do we solve for that? So you took all the learnings that you'd gathered from your father's time and your time at Simplicity working with large businesses, and you curated a cohort model that you started piloting about 5 years ago. How did it go?
The first sessions went really well, and then we realized that we didn't have the model quite right. So we were just doing quarterly strats. So we do 2 days a quarter. And what was amazing is that just doing the quarterlies didn't anchor in enough of the forcing function, enough of the accountability, enough of the reflection loop to get it done. So you'd have people show up 90 days later and they had like 10% of their plan done. Most of it done 3 days before they knew they were about to show up again.
Got distracted by the day-to-day business, right?
Exactly. So that's when we had to revisit the model. And, we hit some home runs in there, but we really had to go above and beyond and check in the organization, et cetera. So we had to go back and go, okay, what would drive more of a forcing function? And that's where we landed on the 2 days a quarter, half a day a month. And you'll know as we're moving with and starting to offer a better and best model, that we're anchoring it in with what really is needed, which is that weekly coaching meeting where like you got to look, your quarterlies are the outputs you want. Your monthlies are checking in to make sure you're still focused, but your weekly is really sorting the pesky details of implementation, which is where all the gold starts to come.
Yeah. Yeah, that nudging function is critical because you're essentially organizations are changing the way they operate. Yeah. So you can't expect somebody to go to a 2-day strategy session and then immediately go back to work completely differently. Like you have to change those habits, and those forcing functions that you've implemented in the program have helped a lot with that, right?
Yeah, one of the early transformations we did was a great client, about $150 million business, and the COO looked at us and said, "You are rewiring the way the senior leadership team shows up and executes. And the only way you do that is by changing the rhythm by which we meet and make decisions, and then holding a level of accountability to the decisions we've made." And before this, we didn't have that. I mean, most of our success comes down to creating an environment where we can make commitments and get people really aligned to them, and then holding the line on the discipline of showing up and positive peer pressure is an amazing thing, right? And it is that simple and it is that hard.
Yeah, I really appreciate you going there and unpacking that, because I think that, and again, even getting into your family history and stuff, I think that that's a story that people need to understand, that where this comes from, how long you've been working on it and curating it and improving it. Overnight success, right? In 12 years kind of
12-year overnight. One of the fun things, had an entrepreneur look at me, and when she arrived at our doorstep, she arrived because the person she asked to guide her, she said, "I do not need any more Instagram influencer bullshit business specialists. I've had enough of that. What I need is someone who actually understands business who can help me here. That's what I'm looking for." And so she arrived at our doorstep on that recommendation. And 6 months later, she said, "Matt, look, I'll sing from the high mountains. I've been through every empowerment camp you can imagine, I'm good enough, all the stuff that, look, you got to have confidence. You got to believe in your value. You got to believe in what you're selling. Sure. But that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. You need to actually have some business fundamentals that this is based on. It's not a series of models that you've drawn up and invented yourself. Anybody who's got that, come on, this is based on a canon of literature. And I think as a historian, I have maybe too much respect for the past, but I think we do ourselves a disservice by thinking that anything's really new. But it does have to be packaged so I can understand it. And it only has value when I can use it to integrate into my business to create more return. And that's where the real value comes.
Yeah. And I think what you've been able to do, and speaking from personal experience, back in the days I was a client, is it's practical implementation. You use that tagline, results, not reports. Well, there's nothing truer than that statement when we're talking about this stuff. So no, I really appreciate you going there, and I'm really excited about where we're headed with the program, and that we can provide it in a cost-effective way to so many companies. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help us grow, please share it with your friends and colleagues. This would mean the world to us.